So the Independent Electoral Commission will today issue a comprehensive statement on the state of party funding. So in terms of the Political Party Funding Act, which came into effect in April 2021, parties are required to disclose all donations of 100,000 Rand or more. The Electoral Commission will brief the media on the political party submission of audited annual financial statements for the financial year ended 31 March 2022. The IEC is mandated to publish all the declarations made by the parties on a quarterly basis. And discuss this and other issues, we welcome into the studio the Chief Electoral Officer at the IEC. It's great to have you, Sai Mamabolo. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Lian.
So, all right, it's all happening this afternoon. So my question to you is, are the financial books of parties that would contest next year's elections in order? And how is it looking for this report that has been compiled?
Well, the report that we will issue, it's a groundbreaking report, a novel report, one which has never been issued before in our history. So it deals with who has complied in terms of submitting audited financial statements and what the auditor's opinion is. So it will give a reflection of the health status of party finances and the level of compliance to the Act. It will also give us a glimpse of the total donations advanced to political parties in that financial year, 2021 to March 2022. So in a sense, the report nudges us slightly further in terms of transparency in the party funding space.
Okay. Have political parties complied with this? How is the sort of, if we look at the political parties that are possibly contesting, have they complied with everything that you have asked of them to get this report together?
The represented parties, there's a high level of compliance. And with respect to those parties who bear no representation in the National Assembly nor provincial legislatures, the level of compliance is quite low. Quite understandably, though, because some of them are parties that are registered but are not active, as it were, because they don't receive funding from the state and are struggling, in fact, to make ends meet. So I think it's an area where we have to intervene by way of a statutory amendment to lessen the burden, as it were, on those that don't receive state funding.
Yeah, and it's a big thing, because you do see a massive discrepancy between funding for the bigger parties and then the smaller parties lose out entirely. So, I mean, how do we rectify that? What is one way of actually looking at it and saying, this is how we can sort it out?
Look, I think it goes back to the purpose of the Act. The purpose of the Act, in my opinion, is twofold. One, to open the transparency within party funding space. I think that is important, so that voters are empowered in terms of who donates to their own parties and make an informed decision whether they want to continue voting for a particular party. That's the first issue. The second issue is to protect our own democracy from corporate influences as well as foreign influences. So the nature of the amendments that must be made, it's a matter that the portfolio committee is already, the portfolio committee in the National Assembly is already seized with, and we hope that there'll be greater speed in dealing with the amendments around party funding, so as to ameliorate the burden on these unrepresented parties who have a same level of accountability with parties that receive funding.
Okay, so a lot of the political parties have been sort of crying foul, saying that they really are struggling with political funding, well, with funding and getting donations, and, you know, just saying that people don't want this to be made public. They're also asking for the threshold to be increased from around about up to 250 to 500,000 Rand. So these are a couple of the things, and they're asking for this act to be amended. Is the IEC considering this at all?
Well, it's not a matter really for the IEC to determine the threshold, excuse me.
Just remind us of the threshold right now.
The current threshold is 100,000 Rand.
Okay.
Anything that a party receives by way of donation above 100,000 rands has to be disclosed to us, and we publish that on a quarterly basis. There are arguments both ways. That's why the National Assembly, being a representative body of all South Africans, must make a policy determination to say, is 100,000 an optimum point at which people must disclose? Should it be bigger? Should it be lower? Because there's a sentiment as well that says, take it down a bit. And we've got to debate that in the National Assembly eventually, and for decisions to be made.
Yeah, quite interestingly, we actually saw the Home Affairs Minister appearing last week and appearing in Parliament and talking to the possible changes in the Political Party Funding Act. And he was telling members of the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs that the Act in its current form can be viewed as unconstitutional. Reason being is the fact that the legislation does not include independent candidates, and there's a bit of a loophole in there. Is the IEC escalating the engagement with political funders to contribute to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund?
This is one area where we've not been successful, and not for want of trying. We've been engaging with corporates, both at the organized level as well as at the bilateral level, to seek ways to ensure that corporates contribute to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, and by so doing support our own democracy. But the response is a bit lackadaisical in many ways. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Okay.
Quite lackadaisical, and I think we've got to build a national consciousness around corporates and even individuals. There are some individuals who've been making contributions to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, and I think that is something that we've got to encourage, because the responsibility does not only go to corporates, it must extend as well to individuals who have the means to make our democracy work.
Yeah.
Because by contributing to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, you're not making a contribution to one party, but you are making a contribution to all parties who have representation. So you are giving everybody a fair opportunity to be successful in the political space.
Yeah, independent candidates though, let's focus on this, because you say, you know, with the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, this is still a big work in progress, and perhaps one of the places that really need help. But again, going back to what Minister Motsoaledi was saying, he was saying that the independents also need to be funded, and that is something that we need to look at, because it'll be illegal and unconstitutional to leave them out. But you cannot fund them without an act of Parliament. And this is the reality. I mean, will the process to have an act in Parliament have an effect again on the preparations for the general elections coming up?
Well, no, certainly. The minister is right. You can't go into this election without having a statutory framework to provide funding to independent candidates once they're elected. So Parliament must be seized with the statutory amendments to ensure that there's a framework that allocates funding to those independent candidates who will be representatives in the National Assembly and in provincial legislatures. I think they do have time between now and possibly the end of the year to pass that legislation and ensure that there's certainty in the funding arrangements that independents must be aware of.
Yeah, I want to get back to that threshold again, because that I think is a big sticking point. I mean, if we do see that increasing to say 500,000 rand, there is a concern that the donation declaration would pose a risk to democracy, because fewer parties would require to declare then, and this would not be fair. And I suppose that's what people are looking at. Have you managed to come up with a solution to this?
Look, the thing, as I say, can be seen from two perspectives. One, that if you raised the threshold, you lessen the burden even on the funders, because they don't have to fill in forms, because our disclosure framework is bilateral, is on the donor and the person receiving the donation. They both have to declare with the IEC. Now, if you take up the threshold, you lessen the burden on the donors, They don't have to be filling in forms and so on, and thereby increasing the money that will flow into political parties. That's one side of the argument. The other side is it might have an inadvertent effect of ensuring that monies that ought to be known by members of the public, which flow to political parties, are not known. So you may then have that difficulty. So the issue really then is to find a judicious balance between those two competing imperatives and find a median that will work for our democracy. So it's not this one or the other one is right. It's about getting the right level to deal with the matter.
All right, so let's leave that there. We're going to be seeing, obviously, this report coming out, and I'm sure a lot of people waiting to see what is actually incorporated into this. And you say something very, very groundbreaking. I want to move on to, while we still got time, the Electoral Amendment Bill. This must be adding a lot of pressure to you. You know, not only from time constraints, preparation constraints, also financial constraints to the IEC to try and work around all of this. How are you doing in terms of preparation for the elections, and also the financial balance sheet of the IEC, having to put all of this together in this time frame?
Yeah, we had to start with the preparations, even in that context of uncertainty, because we realized that were we to wait for the bill to be assented by the president, which he eventually did on the 17th of April, we would not have been able to be ready for 2024 elections. And I think if we were not going to be ready, the country would not pardon us for that, because everyone expects the election to be held on the date which they are called for by the president in law and in terms of the constitutional time frame. So you can't have the life of the National Assembly going beyond 5 years. So we've started, and that decision we did at risk because we want to deal with the changes that we need to make in our candidate nomination system. We need to make changes in our result system. We need to make changes to the training material that we offer to officials and so on. And we are poised to do that. Were there to be changes, even at the instance of a court, we will make adjustments as may be necessary. But any prolonged period of uncertainty is going to have an impact on how ready we are, is going to have an impact on the quality that we deliver on election day.
And finances for you from the IEC side? Still
yes,
okay?
Huge financial implications. An example, we're planning to print 70 million ballots, national ballot, provincial ballot, 35 million. Now we have an added ballot to make 3 ballots for the regional component of the elections of the National Assembly. So we're going to be printing over 100 million ballots within a short space of time. That's a huge financial implication there. To change our business applications, 10 million POP to look at the result system, the candidate nomination system, and the retraining of staff. Workshops across the country to cover the length and breadth of the Republic is going to be a huge cost. Fortunately, National Treasury, we've had discussions, and they are coming to the party.
Okay.
And there are no concerns, at least at this point, insofar as finances go.
We've spoken to this before, and it's very, very likely that this is going to be challenged in a court of law, how the Act is sitting now. You know this very, very well. What's going to happen? I mean, you've said it not once, twice, a million times you've said it. If there are any more delays, this is going to jeopardize the elections. So we know this is coming up. There is going to be a challenge. What's going to happen? Where does this leave you? Where does this leave South Africa, I should say, when it comes to the elections?
Well, those that are aggrieved by the amendment are threatening to go to court, and they will go to court, I suppose, at some point to vindicate their rights. We will explain to the court what I'm outlining here, that any changes of a structural nature that may be introduced is going to have an impact on the readiness and the preparedness of the IC to deliver an election, and that is likely to have an impact on the quality of an election, and even whether certain things may be possible at all. I think we'll be very upfront with the court in respect of those elements. And that is not to say we are making a decision whether this system is preferred above the other. That's not where the IC is. The IC is raising practical questions about its ability to deliver an election within the constitutional time frame. That's really our preoccupation.
Indeed. And finally, very, very quickly, Si, I know that we're going into news now, but in terms of the seat allocations, that's a big, big issue to deal with as well. This task of creating formulas for the seat allocations for independent candidates for the polls. How is that looking? Where are you with this?
It's done. Okay. It's part of it's a schedule to the amendments that were passed and assented to. So that is done. It's not a problem. We are coding that. We are writing that as a business application, and it's a component of our result system.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for talking to us. I know there is so much to talk about with regards to what's going on, all the changes that are taking place to the systems, the formulas, the voting, the independent candidates. But today, the thing to look out for, of course, is that political party funding annual report that is going to be released. What time is it coming out?
At 1.
1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, we'll be able to get a glimpse into what is in that book. I would grab it, but that's the 2022 one. I'll wait for the 2023 one to come out.
Thank you.